Hello and welcome. Today we're exploring The Outfit, a gripping crime thriller about a skilled tailor finds himself embroiled in a deadly game of deception and survival. Watch till the end to uncover the intense story. Enjoy the thrilling journey. The establishment opens in the city of Chicago in 1956 in an understated and peaceful manner. An old man owned a fashion store. Mr. Leonard Burling is not Leonard Burling, true to life, an American native, however, a British national who relocated to the United States a few years back. Mr. Leonard had previously worked in the world's greatest fashion retailer located in the London area for a number of years, then chose to relocate for a number of reasons. Following his relocation to Chicago, Mr. Leonard opened his own clothing store and hired Mabel Shawn, a stunning woman, as his helper. Every item of clothing in Mr. Leonard's store is highly regarded in Chicago, and a number of affluent families in the city have personally undertaken to browse their routine store. A normal family among the others, Boyle, is one of his shop's clients. The Boyle household is regarded as one of the most powerful and influential mafia organizations in the Chicago area. Frequently, the Boyles went to Mr. Leonard's to purchase suits or just send letters via the shop's mailbox. Mr. Leonard has consciously offered a mailbox in his establishment so that clients can write messages or tips in the city. That evening, the Boyle family's lone son, Richie, visited Mr. Leonard's store to retrieve correspondence from their contact. Richie brought Mr. Boyle's confidant, Francis. Mr. Leonard didn't seem affected by their arrival and did not pique his interest in the writings to the Boyles, as he was occupied with his position as a tailor. Francis discovered a correspondence from a mafia group known as The Outfit. Richie then requested that Mr. Leonard leave the space for a bit, since they felt this letter was extremely confidential and private. Mabel displayed a gift in the lobby, shaped like a snowball, for Mr. Leonard. According to Mabel, the gift was sent by an acquaintance who truly enjoys gathering snowballs from numerous stunning locations throughout the globe, like the Big Ben Tower, the Eiffel Tower, or Barcelona, as Mabel wants to journey around the globe. Mabel conveyed her surprise that Mr. Leonard, who might set up shop anywhere, decided on Chicago as a residence. After Mr. Leonard was left by Richie and Francis, he revealed to Mabel that a man employed at the clock shop next to their store had requested to be introduced to Mr. Leonard. However, Mabel didn't find the invitation since she was already familiar with the individual. Mr. Leonard determined that Mabel has a particular bond with Richie because he has. Roy promised to retrieve them soon. Francis requested that Mr. Leonard close Richie's wound to stop the hemorrhage. Mr. Leonard hesitated because he had never closed a patient's wound, but ultimately did so due to his minimal prior combat experience. Richie passed out from the terrible agony, recalling that his body wounds were sutured without anesthetic. Following the successful repair of Richie's wound, Mr. Leonard was able to stop Richie's bleeding, while Francis removed the tape from the suitcase and requested Mr. Leonard to take care of Richie temporarily. Mr. Leonard declined and requested that Francis carry Richie in his luggage, as he refused to participate in the Boyle family disputes. Francis insisted that Richie prolong his visit because Leonard's store was the only safe location. Francis had to depart right away to locate a tape recorder to access the tape's contents. Francis said the recordings were wiretaps of a Boyle family member, revealing a traitor in the Boyle family cooperating with the FBI by bugging one of their common locations. Richie and Francis had planned to play the tape elsewhere, but the Falvin group ambushed them, wounding Richie. Francis needed to play the tape immediately to identify the betrayer within their family. Shortly after Francis departed, Richie regained consciousness. Mr. Leonard stated he knew about the tale of the traitor and the tapes involving the Boyle family. Mr. Leonard questioned Richie about who he believed to be the betrayer, suggesting it could be someone close to the Boyle household. Mr. Leonard then claimed to be the one selling clothing and the traitor who had disclosed details to their adversary. Richie was quiet, then laughed, believing Mr. Leonard's remarks were jests. Mr. Leonard shared in the laughter, but Richie insisted Mr. Leonard could not be the betrayer, as he was merely an ordinary tailor. Mr. Leonard continued to explain that he was a cutter, not a tailor. There's a distinction between a tailor and a cutter. The person who possesses the needle and thread can become a tailor, but he has studied for years at the top clothing retailer in the world known as The Row. Mr. Leonard had been employed as an apprentice before obtaining authorization to open his own store. Mr. Leonard then brought up Francis, adamant about identifying the traitor, claiming it was conceivable that Francis himself was the traitor. Shortly after, Francis returned to Leonard's store. Mr. Leonard, before Francis and Richie met, told Francis in a whisper that Richie believed he was the traitor. Richie had taken off his suitcase and departed earlier, teasing Francis and Richie to create distrust between them. Mr. Leonard's influence over Richie made Francis question why Falvin's men fired, but only Richie was struck. Francis retorted that he was simply having good fortune that evening. Francis insisted he would take the tape to the cassette screening right then, but Richie banned it, desiring to bide his time until his father arrived to retrieve them. Richie and Francis fought amidst the tape until they discovered the bag was empty. They each pointed guns at each other. Richie attempted to shoot but failed, and Francis's shot struck Richie's neck, killing him. Francis looked through Richie's belongings right away. Soon after, Mr. Roy and his men arrived at Mr. Leonard's store. Francis experienced panic and asked Mr. Leonard to hide Richie's body and wipe his blood off the floor. By the time Mr. Roy entered, Francis and the shop's floor were spotless. Francis concocted an untruth about Richie's location, claiming Richie had departed with a tape without informing him of his destination. Mr. Roy requested that Francis locate Richie and return him. Mr. Roy then spoke with Mr. Leonard, explaining that the world's largest mafia organization proposed an alliance to the Boyle family to challenge LaFontaine. The outfit had provided the FBI with wiretapped audio to identify the traitor within the Boyle household. Mr. Leonard was taken aback, querying why Mr. Roy was informing him of this, as Mr. Roy had never previously informed him about their collective affairs. Mr. Roy became aware Richie was at Leonard's shop, since his coat remained hanging there. Mr. Roy understood Richie couldn't have left without it, so he knew Leonard was hiding something. Mr. Roy pointed a gun at Mr. Leonard, demanding an explanation. Before he could elaborate, Francis burst into the space, transporting Mabel. Fearing for Mabel's safety, Mr. Leonard outlined Richie's embarrassing situation. Francis had captured 4 of LaFontaine's men, refraining from firing. Richie decided to return to LaFontaine to show Mr. Roy his value. Mr. Leonard explained he hadn't informed Mr. Roy earlier because Richie forbade it to avoid concern. Mr. Roy questioned why Francis brought Mabel. Francis clarified Richie likely visited Mabel, his partner. Mr. Roy inquired of Mabel about Richie's whereabouts, but Mabel acknowledged she lacked knowledge. Francis interrupted Mabel, claiming to have observed a bloodstain on her rug, likely Richie's blood. Mr. Roy, irritated, pressured Mabel to be honest forcefully. Mr. Leonard stopped Mr. Roy and attempted to soothe him, revealing he was previously married to Mabel's mother, but they both died in a fire, so he saw Mabel as his own child. Immediately following the phone ring, Mr. Leonard answered. The call originated from Richie, who stated he was running from LaFontaine and requested to be collected at Street 31. Upon hearing this, Mr. Roy and his soldiers hurried to retrieve Richie. Francis decided to remain, stating he would take care of Mabel and Mr. Leonard if they continued to lie. Mr. Leonard clarified he purposefully provided the address, so the LaFontaine group might ambush Mr. Roy and his troops. Mr. Leonard also clarified Mabel was the previous betrayer, obtaining information about the Boyle family to divulge to LaFontaine for payment. Mabel knew Francis would discover this, so she contacted the FBI for assistance in intercepting and detaining the Boyle household. Mr. Leonard discovered Mabel's plans and left her to earn cash for her global tour. Mr. Leonard struck a deal to safeguard Mabel, following LaFontaine's arrival at Leonard's store to pay Mabel in return for the tape. Francis questioned Mr. Leonard and Mabel, but was given a phony tape recording Mr. Leonard's voice. The original recording remained in Mr. Leonard's ownership to give to the FBI to remove the Boyle family mafia and the LaFontaine group. Mr. Leonard instructed Mabel to travel with the financial gain. That evening, Mr. Leonard gathered his items and set his store to remove all traces. However, Francis, still alive, abruptly stood up and fired at Mr. Leonard. Luckily, the shot did not land and only hurt his arm. Mr. Leonard revealed his true identity to Francis. He used to be a monster like Francis, but after quitting his employer and moving to London, his boss's men discovered his home and murdered his family in a blaze. Thus, he relocated to Chicago to begin a new life and improve as a person. The last scene of the movie features Mr. Leonard closing his Chicago store to lead a more fulfilling life. Thank you for watching. If you're new, remember to subscribe for more. See you in the next video for more recaps like this one.